What is up, and welcome into JR Weekly here for Week 5 NFL. Man, Week 5 already. And of course, on this show, every single week, I break down the sports portfolio landscape. I don't know exactly what you want to call it, but we're going to talk some season-long fantasy football. We're also going to talk some betting as well, a player prop for every single game, a prop that I like, a prop that I'm placing across the various sports books out there. Of course, if you want to get in on the betting action, you can get in over at ftnbets.com. Use a promo code RATPACK. You'll get yourself a little discount, which discounts are nice because, hey, you can save that money for betting. You can also get in over at ftnfantasy.com. I know a lot of people are asking for rankings. Got to be a subscriber, but there are a lot of bonuses to being a subscriber. We also have this. I can't tell you. I did not expect this thing to be popular, but we have a Discord server, I guess is what they're called. I don't know. I'm old. What do you want from me? But we're able to chat back and forth, and we do all day long. I have my own channel on there. People are talking to me constantly. People are asking me questions literally right now as I'm on this show, and it's a great resource. So if you want to get your questions answered. Sometimes it's hard for me to get to everybody on Twitter, but I get to everybody in the Discord server. So go check that out, ftnfantasy.com. Of course, if you play DFS, ftndaily.com. We do everything at FTN. All right, let's dive in to this week's action. Do not forget, there is a London game. A couple years ago, I forget who the player was, but there was a player who was a surprise inactive, and people forgot to check before the London game and ended up taking a goose egg as a result of that player. Don't let that happen. Of course, there's no surprise with Calvin Ridley, though, in this game, of course, between the Jets and Atlanta Falcons. He did not make the trip over. Russell Gage didn't make the trip over. They're hurting that wide receiver in this one. Kyle Pitts will certainly benefit. Cordero Patterson, the offensive weapon that he is going to be probably pretty busy here. But for the most part, this is a bad situation for Atlanta. And it hasn't been a good situation pretty much all season long. Matt Ryan has been dinking and dunking his way through the season. Average depth of target of just 5.9 yards downfield. That's the lowest out of any 4-week starter. Anybody who started all 4 games so far this season, that's by far the lowest. The only quarterback who started a game who is lower than that is Andy Dalton. And we know how that worked out for Andy Dalton. So a lot of dink and dunk here. And the Jets defense is surprisingly good against the pass. I don't know what's happening. Is this proof that we're in the simulation? I have no idea. But the Jets are looking good against the pass. So when I see 265.5 for Matt Ryan passing yards, I am absolutely hammering the under on that. Minus 115 on the under over at PointsBet. Remember, over at ftnbets.com, you can use the prop shop to search out any prop bets out there. Great resource. It's the Google of sports betting. Type in Matt Ryan's name, boom, 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 Matt Ryan, and you're able to find all of the lines for Matt Ryan across the industry and specific to the books that are available in your state or the state close by. If you happen to be, maybe close to a legal state, hey, all you got to do is get across the border in a lot of these states, and then you're good to go. So you don't necessarily have to live in that state. So Matt Ryan under on 265.5. By the way, I'm keeping an eye on Michael Carter for the Jets, not the defensive back, the running back. His workload has been increasing, so that is definitely encouraging right there. Let's move on to Green Bay and Cincinnati. So obviously we're keeping a close eye on Joe Mixon. I don't have news in front of me right now, but it didn't look good for Joe Mixon to play in this one. I would imagine he'll end up being listed as questionable and probably won't play in this contest. So that means Samaje Perine and Chris Evans. I tell you what, man, Michigan, these kids coming out of Michigan left and right, you have super athletic kids. Chris Evans is one of those, and he certainly can contribute in passing down situations. So I would figure you will see very likely it'll look like a 65-35 split between Samaje Perine and Chris Evans if Joe Mixon does not go in this game. T. Higgins looks like he will be back, though, so that takes the wind out of the sails for CJ a little bit if you happen to pick him up at tight end. Not looking as promising there. It was a good week last week if you happen to have him, but a lot of folks didn't. Now, in this one, I want to go on the other side of this contest, though, for player prop purposes. I'm looking at that Green Bay backfield. Of course, we know Aaron Jones is locked in as the lead back, But last week, A.J. Dillon with 15 rushing attempts, but the books haven't caught up to this. He's going to be used. Now, it's not enough usage that you're watching this, you're a fantasy person, you think, I should start him. No, we're not to that point. But his line is only 6.5 rushing attempts. And I love rushing attempts for player prop purposes because I only have to predict one thing, not two things. Ordinarily, if I'm predicting rushing yards, not only do I have to predict volume, but then I also have to predict efficiency. With rushing attempts, it's just volume. 6.5. Now, it is juiced to the over at William Hill. I'm seeing right now, -135. That's the best odds that you're going to get right now. Even at -135, though, I'll attack the over on that one for A.J. Dillon. Let's move to Detroit and Minnesota. All eyes on the Minnesota backfield. Dalvin Cook's listed as questionable. He said earlier in the week that he was going to play. Of course, we saw basically a 50-50 split essentially last week between him and Alexander Mattison. And with Cook still dinged up with the ankle issue, I would expect another split in workload. If Cook is full, ready to go, 100%, Alexander Mattison doesn't play a large role in this offense, but that's not the case. So with this game, I think there's a great opportunity to attack the rushing and receiving yards, the combined line. Right now at DraftKings, that line is 93.5. And it looks like -115 on either side of that thing, so no juice on either side. I think we can attack the under on this one. Now, it's not to say that I'm worried about him for fantasy purposes. Heck, Dalvin Cook could have 45 rushing yards and still score 2 touchdowns and be just fine. Detroit lets up touchdowns left and right to opposing running backs. 6 rushing scores already this season to the position. So he's fine for fantasy purposes. But for sports betting purposes, 93.5 is a pretty hefty combined line right there. So I actually do want to attack that under in that one right there. Moving on to Denver and Pittsburgh. So Denver, Teddy Bridgewater managed to work his way through the concussion protocol, which is certainly a good thing for Teddy. It's a good thing for Cortland Sutton. It's a good thing for everybody all around in Denver because Drew Lock under center would have been a disaster. It was essentially a disaster last week for for about a half of play, and would have been good for Pittsburgh's defense for fantasy purposes. But Teddy gives them a lot more stability there. On the other side, you do have some injury questions here. Juju Smith-Schuster is still banged up, going to play. Chase Claypool banged up as well. And, of course, Big Ben banged up, dealing with hips injuries, plural, and really showing signs of decline. I mean, we already saw the signs last year. It is essentially not even signs. Decline has fully set in with Ben Roethlisberger. He looks like he's really struggling to throw the football, even though he's throwing it a ton, 42.5 passing attempts per game, which is a big-time number right there. But he is going up against a Denver defense that has been quite good in all phases this year. Very good against the run, very good against the pass. Opposing signal callers averaging just 215.3 net passing yards per game against Denver. So, Ben, let's look at Ben. And I think we have an interesting opportunity. So some books will have the combined passing and rushing yards as well. So sometimes you'll see rushing and receiving yards. Sometimes you'll see passing and rushing yards. And sometimes that'll bump up the passing yardage line. And when you have a player like Ben Roethlisberger, who even fully healthy is not mobile, he's as mobile as a tree. Then you add into that, you get a couple extra yards to the passing yardage line. I love that. So here we have 253.5. Is the line, -115 on either side over at DraftKings. He had 232 passing yards last week. He's run for 5 yards this season, so that's not a factor, plus the fact that he's banged up. I love the under on this one. Tough matchup. He's struggling to throw the football other than dink and dunk. He's not going to run. So all of that points to a nice, healthy under. Let's move on to, let's see, what's next on my list here. New Orleans and Washington I have up next here. And with New Orleans and Washington, Jameis Winston has attempted very few passes this season. He is actually at 21.5 passing attempts per game, which is by far the lowest out of anybody who started all 4 weeks. We do see a little bit of Taysom Hill. Taysom Hill's hopefully not going to vulture any more touchdowns from Alvin Kamara, but Jameis is not throwing the ball a lot. However, at the same time, he is facing a Washington defense that it has been the most friendly to opposing quarterbacks so far this season. It's 307 net passing yards per game, 2.5 passing scores per game. So it's the number one fantasy matchup. It's not the most net passing yards per game allowed, but it is up there. They're one of the few teams who's up over 300 net passing yards. So Jameis in this one, who has not been throwing the ball a lot, still has the opportunity to put up some decent numbers. Not fantasy worthy whatsoever, but his passing yardage line is so low that it warrants an overplay here. 197.5 on DraftKings, minus 115 to the over. Like that over there with Jameis Winston in terms of passing yards. Took a couple deep shots last week too, connecting with Marquez Callaway on one of them. Let's move on to Philadelphia and Carolina. It does not look like Christian McCaffrey will be playing in this one. He's doubtful, so we'll see him next week, which is fortunate. For fantasy purposes, a 2-week absence is really not that bad, especially at this time of year. You don't want a 2-week absence in December, a 2-week absence in October, whatever. Not a big deal. So we'll have Chuba Hubbard. I really don't trust him as anything more than a flex option. We saw too much Rodney Smith last week. I didn't think it was going to – I thought it was going to be Royce Freeman. That was where my spidey senses were tingling. But, wrong player, but right idea. Rodney Smith involved in the passing game. They weren't using Chuba there. So that was a problem. But on the other side, too, the Eagles have apparently forgotten how to run the football other than Jalen Hurts. The run game has not been working whatsoever, and they're going up against a very tough Carolina defense here. Carolina against Philly, though, in the passing game. Cam Darnold rushing for all of these touchdowns. I know what I said. Cam Darnold rushing for all these touchdowns, but also being pretty efficient as a passer. Now, the Eagles are a really interesting matchup. They're only allowing 217.3 net passing yards per game, but they're also allowing 2.3 passing scores per game. So Darnold, maybe it's not the biggest yardage day, but they very likely will still get it done here for fantasy purposes. And I love the connection between Darnold and DJ Moore. It's been phenomenal so far this season. 8 catches in each of the last 3 games here for DJ Moore. And his receptions line is only 5.5. Now, it is juiced to the over, minus 155 right now on DraftKings. I would still play that. That's one of those where sometimes, I will bump my units up. I'll go up to like 1.5 units on that type of play because I'm very confident. I do want it to at least pay out. I always bet a standard unit. I don't bet to win. I go the other way around. I know it's some people go the other way. I prefer it this way. I prefer to keep it simple. So I have a standard betting unit, and that's what I use. I would, consider 1.5 on this one. I would also consider using this one in a parlay. There are, unique ways here or interesting ways that we can get ourselves some better odds. And this would be one of them, using the over on DJ Moore receptions. Let's move on to Tennessee and Jacksonville. And, with this one, Tennessee is still likely going to be without Julio Jones. We have to see what happens with A.J. Brown, who's been limited in practice so far this week. I don't have a Friday report in front of me as we're live right now. But regardless, Ryan Tannehill has moved back outside of the quarterback ones into more of a quarterback 2 play. 2 weeks ago, he was fine. Last week, obviously, without those receivers, was not fine. On the other side, Laviska Shenault, man. It's unfortunate that now everybody is aware of it because earlier in the week, that was kind of our little secret. Like, yes, this guy is a wide receiver 3 going forward. Now kind of everybody knows about it thanks to NBC Sports Edge blurbing about it. Got the message out there, but I do buy in on that idea. I certainly do buy in on Laviska Shenault as a wide receiver 3+. He's going to have plenty of volume. The team is a disaster, so they're going to be playing from behind pretty much all the time. Outside, I know they played with the lead last week for a little bit, but they're going to be playing from behind, and that certainly bodes well for the passing game. But I'm going to key in on Derrick Henry. Now, normally, I really don't like rushing yardage lines over, I don't even know, like 80. Derrick Henry's right now is 114.5, and I'm going over on that one. That is an enormous line, and I'm going over on it, minus 115 on DraftKings. Of course, the last time he faced Jacksonville, week 14 last season, went for 215 rushing yards, and he has been an absolute monster so far this season. I think this one's just easy. If you don't have the full strength in the passing game, you don't really have the need to use the passing game. You're facing a defense that can struggle against the run. Just feed the dude the rock. Feed him the rock. 31.8 touches per game for Derrick Henry. And he also has 6 runs of 15-plus yards this season. That's tied with Lamar Jackson for the most. Lamar led in that category last year, but Henry was second, 21 runs of 15-plus yards. That's a massive, massive, massive amount right there. Henry is an absolute monster. Moving on to New England and Houston, and is this a Nick Caserio revenge game? Whatever. On the Houston side, Brandon Cooks is the only show in town. He is the only viable fantasy option. But that's not a bad thing for Brandon Cooks. If you look at air yards, of course, you can check out the air yards tool over at ftnfantasy.com. You look at air yards, he's second among wide receivers in air yards, 519. All those opportunities there with air yards. The higher that number is, the more opportunity you have. Brandon Cooks, tons and tons and tons of opportunity this season. But I'm going to go to the other side for player prop purposes. And I do think this is a game script that favors Damian Harris this week. So with Damian Harris, he is going to benefit when they play from the lead. And, they're not going to play from the lead, all the time, obviously. We just saw that recently here. But in this contest where they are heavy favorites, they're going to play from the lead. So that type of game script favors Damian Harris. He also was used a little bit more in the passing game in terms of routes run last week. Mac Jones has only thrown to the end zone 3 times so far this year, which is not a big number at all when you're not even averaging 1 per game. That's not good for business. And so it's no surprise that Jacoby Myers has not caught a touchdown this season. Maybe a surprise that he hasn't caught one in his career, although Cam Newton was his quarterback last year. He's thrown for 2, and he has yet to catch 1. It's really surprising. But he has caught a lot of balls. He's caught 17, in fact, over the last 2 games. And his receptions line is 5.5, and it's juiced to the under. Right now I'm seeing at DraftKings Sportsbook, plus 105. Give me those plus odds. I love when I can get plus odds on a bet that I like, so I don't have to hit that bet as much over the long term to be profitable. So 5.5, he's been over this line in 3 of 4 games this season. Like I said, 17 catches over the last 2. And Mac Jones obviously is looking his way plenty. So we're going to go after that over right there. Moving on to Chicago and the Raiders. Justin Fields is making his second start, and he will be the starter the rest of the way. And I do think this is interesting. So last week, if you looked at it and you just simply judged things based on fantasy football scoring, it wasn't a good game for Fields. But if you actually go back and watch, I was pretty impressed with what I saw out of Fields. Now, the team did cover him up. Only 17 passing attempts in that game. But he had 6 throws that traveled at least 20 air yards. Now, a lot of people saw the Darnell Mooney reception where Fields dropped that ball into a bucket. That was a beautiful deep ball from Fields. But he connected on 5 of the 6 deep balls. That's a big-time number right there. 172 yards on those throws. That was 83% of his total yardage for the day. This screams upside going forward once they take the training wheels off. And I don't think that happens this week. But once they do, it's game on. Now, of course, Damian Williams will be the lead back here. And as I said, I do expect them to cover up Justin Fields with the run game. We're going to see a lot of Damian Williams. We'll see a little bit of rookie Khalil Herbert as well. Damian Williams is every bit an RB2 in season-long fantasy football. And by the way, buy low on Allen Robinson while you still can. You can get him for pennies on the dollar at this point. Buy low on Allen Robinson. On the other side, Josh Jacobs looks like he's good to go, which is fine and dandy. Derek Carr's actually throwing the ball downfield. His average depth of target right now is 9.1. That's very high for Derek Carr. So maybe this production is sustainable here for Carr in that offense. They have the weapons and they're taking the shots. But I want to go back to Justin Fields for the prop for this game. I just mentioned 17 passing attempts last week. I mentioned I do think they are going to continue to cover him up because it's wise for them to do so. So I'm going to attack his passing attempts line. Here's another one where we just have to predict volume, not efficiency. 30.5 is the line, minus 115 on the under there over at PointsBet. Give me that under. Give me that under. I think this is a game where maybe it's not 17 again, but it's not over 30. You know, we're in the 20s somewhere with passing attempts here. So that's an easy under for me there with Justin Fields. Moving on to Cleveland and the Chargers. Baker Mayfield is banged up. He is non-throwing shoulder. He hurt that in week 2, and it has hindered him here. But the Browns have the benefit of being able to lean on the run. They're also facing a defense that's allowing over 5 yards per carry to opposing running backs, so that's good for Nick Chubb. It's good for Kareem Hunt. On the other side, this is a tough test here for the Chargers. How good is this team offensively? I think we're going to get our answer to that because they're facing a very good, we know is good, Browns defense. So Justin Herbert, Austin Eckler, Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, how good are they actually? It's going to be really interesting to see how that unfolds. But as I said, I do expect the Browns to lean on the run game because that's what the Browns do. And I mentioned with the Derrick Henry line, it's an enormous line. Well, Nick Chubb isn't, it's 20 yards lower, 85.5. It's not an enormous line, but that's still a pretty darn big line. And I still like the over on that one. Minus 115 on the over, DraftKings Sportsbook. I think we see a lot of Nick Chubb. We're going to see plenty of Kareem Hunt as well. But Nick Chubb, with his ability to rip off long runs, he has 4 runs of 15 plus. He scored on 2 of those 4, by the way. That ability right there is so appealing, especially against a defense that is allowing massive chunk yardage to opposing running backs. Let's go to the division rivalry game between the Giants and Dallas Cowboys. Daniel Jones is a viable fantasy option, so you got that going for you. Threw for over 400 yards, and he's facing a Dallas defense that allows 336 net passing yards per game to opposing quarterbacks. That's good. It's good that Saquon Barkley is Saquon Barkley again. That's good. Kenny Golladay is your number 1 receiver because it does not look like they'll have Darius Slayton or Sterling Shepard. But how about John Ross? I mean, this is not brain surgery. Just run that way, kid, and we're going to throw you the ball. Daniel, throw the ball as far as you can, and John Ross is going to go and get it. Nobody can keep up with John Ross. Do that once or twice a game, and you're probably going to convert a bunch of them for touchdowns. And I was encouraged by Kadarius Toney last week as well. A really dynamic player. Get the ball in his hands, and good things can happen. On the other side, Dak Prescott bailed us out last week with 4 passing scores, but it wasn't a big yardage day because their run game is clicking. Ezekiel Elliott is doing just fine, and Tony Pollard is doing just fine. If you have that, you don't need to air it out constantly, and I expect to continue to see that for this offense. So lots of Zeke and a good bit of Tony Pollard. Tony Pollard's rushing yards line right now is 38.5 on DraftKings, minus 115. He hasn't had less than 60 rushing yards in his last 3 games. This line is entirely too low. Now, I realize he's ripping off at a high yards per carry rate that isn't sustainable, but still, if he sees 10 carries, you're telling me he can't get 3.9 yards per carry because that's all he needs. I'm going after this one over on Tony Pollard. Let's move to San Francisco, where it looks like Trey Lance could be the starter here. I don't have Jimmy Garoppolo news in front of me right now, but it'll be very interesting to see. Hey, Trey Lance last week put up an entire week's worth of production in a half. He's the number 19 fantasy quarterback in one half of play. I know it didn't look pretty. I know it didn't. But you know what? I don't care. It doesn't matter if it doesn't look pretty. All that matters is he's putting up fantasy points. You know, sometimes we get a little too critical for fantasy purposes when the bottom line is what matters, and this kid can put points up. Of course, he has the weapons there. Deebo Samuel. George Kittle had 11 targets last week. Don't overlook that because Trey Lance certainly wasn't overlooking George Kittle. He was looking his way a lot in that one. On the other side, of course, we know that Kyler is so explosive. He has weapons. They have 4 legitimate receiving options at wideout, plus Max Williams giving him a pretty solid option at tight end. Now, that has hurt DeAndre Hopkins' value a little bit. He slid back into wide receiver 2 territory. He's still the top receiver for the team, but they don't need to throw him the ball 12 times a game. They just don't need to. So I don't think they're going to going forward. But let's go back on the San Francisco side. So Elijah Mitchell looks like he is trending towards getting back on the field, and I think that he can still be the lead back. But I do also think that Trey Sermon has done enough to have a role going forward. Looked really comfortable last week for San Francisco. Went 19 carries for 89 yards. Not massive numbers by any means, but solid. His rushing yards line right now is 26.5, which I think is too low. Again, is he going to see 19 carries? No. But can he see 8 or 9? Absolutely. And he's not going to average 2.5 yards per carry on those 8 or 9. So give me that one. Especially Arizona defense is better than it was last year. Let's give them credit where credit's due. But give me that one on the over as well. 26.5 rushing yards. I don't want to use Sermon in fantasy, especially if Elijah Mitchell is back. But I do like that over. See, that's the beauty of player props, right? You may not have a guy going in fantasy, but you can still get some action in on him with these props. All right, one more here, because remember, on Mondays, I am here for our Monday Night Football bets show. I give you 5 props that I like for that game, talk a little bit about the game, and some of the stuff that the biggest storylines coming out of the weekend as well. That's at 2 o'clock on Mondays, 2 o'clock Eastern on Mondays. So I don't talk about the Monday Night Football game, but hey, this is a great game to end with. The highly anticipated Sunday night contest between Buffalo and Kansas City, a litmus test game for both teams, really. Buffalo, are they contenders? Because some, certainly including yours truly, think they can be a Super Bowl winning team. Are they? Can they go into Kansas City and win in a big spot? Kansas City, we know their offense is good. Their defense is not good. So can they right the ship there? Because without that, it's going to be hard to take down another Super Bowl here this year for this team. So it's going to be a fascinating contest. We've seen Josh Allen right the ship after a sluggish start for fantasy purposes. He's been explosive. Of course, you have Stephon Diggs, Emmanuel Sanders, Cole Beasley. You got that fleet of receivers, Dawson Knox emerging, and Zach Moss doing a nice job for you as well. And that's a nice matchup for Zach Moss. As I said, Kansas City, not really on the defensive side of the ball. They are really struggling. So great matchup there. On the other side, it's a tougher matchup, no doubt about it. Buffalo's defense has been very good, especially against the pass. But there's no way you're going away from the big 3 for Kansas City for fantasy purposes. The question is Clyde Edwards-Helaire. How much Darrell Williams do we see in this game? Can Clyde Edwards-Helaire maintain the efficiency that he's had over the last 2 weeks? It's going to be tough against the Bills defense that allows 3.25 yards per carry to opposing running backs. But let's go back to Zach Moss. As I mentioned, it is a nice matchup for him right now. The Chiefs allowing over 5 yards per carry to opposing backfields. 5 rushing scores as well on the season. Zach Moss in back-to-back games here, he's gone 60 and 61 rushing yards. He is running ahead of Singletary in that backfield, and his rushing yard line. This is another one. These rushing yard lines are too low this week. 36.5. 3.5. That'd be great. Hammer that over. 36.5. And right now it's minus 114 on the over at FanDuel, so it's not juiced on either side. Hammering the over there for Zach Moss rushing yards. So a lot of rushing yards props this week. Sometimes the books are a little off in certain areas, and it feels like they are off in rushing yards this week. Of course, if you want all of my player props, we have the player props tool, which we update with all of the playable lines that are out there. They're graded from a top-rated bet, which would be with the largest edge, a number 5 bet, whatever you want to call it, rated as a 5-star play, however you want to say it. I don't care what you say. I rate it as number 5. And then all the way down to the lowest playable wagers, which would be at 1. All of that across all the different sports books out there over at ftnbets.com. Promo code RATPACK. And then, of course, remember, you can get in ftndaily.com with the same promo code. I know you NBA folks want to get in because NBA is coming. We're, 10 days away, give or take, whatever it is, till the start of the season. And over at ftnfantasy.com as well, if you want to get on rankings, projections, some pretty freaking awesome tools as well. Use that promo code RATPACK. All right, enjoy the football this weekend. I will be back on Monday for Monday Night Football, 2 Eastern, right here, wherever you're watching this, YouTube, Twitter, what have you. I'll be back for that. But until then, I'm Jeff Ratcliffe, and I'm out.